Hello there. Welcome back to Hanna Wonders, the podcast where I, Hanna, wonder about all things theater. And this week is going to be very special. This week I'm here to talk about a Broadway show titled It's Only a Play by Terrance McNally. While I traditionally have talked about shows that I really love, of course, I started off with Spider-Man, so that doesn't really tell you a lot, but I tend to pick shows that are really inspiring to me. And this week is no different. While I may really dislike the show itself, it brings up an interesting topic for discussion, and that is, what is the role of the critic in Broadway shows? And so this week, we're diving into the role of the critic, what a critic is versus a reviewer, and whether or not they actually have the capacity to shut down a show. I want to begin by clarifying an important distinction on our journey throughout this piece of theater history. The reviewer versus the critic. Sometimes these terms are used interchangeably, but there are important differences. A reviewer will usually work in smaller cities. Phoenix, Arizona is a great example, while a critic is found in large cities and pre-Broadway stops. Reviewers are there to provide insight and to support the arts community, while the critic is there to academically assess the production and then let audiences know about it. Reviews became more popular when newspapers began competing for release times. Reviews are much quicker and simpler to write. Don't get me wrong, there are certainly critics who get full articles out by morning. After all, that's the premise for this show. It's only a play. But there's a lot of history here to the idea of the critic. Since there's been art, there has been someone judging it. Theater critique is as old as Aristotle. He put together poetics to create a proper guide for judging theater, specifically the construction of story and its emotional backing. Once the printing press was in use, the social pages in newspapers were in high demand. When we think of influential critics, the biggest name is the New York Times. The chief theater critic for the Times has arguably had the most power in professional theater for almost 100 years, and our first heavy hitter was named Brooks Atkinson. Brooks Atkinson became chief theater critic in 1925. He has a very concise and eloquent writing style. Brooks was unafraid to give praise as well. He covered both off-Broadway and Broadway, which is completely unheard of today. Brooks didn't care to contextualize the work for his readers. He figured they were already familiar with the plot and the cast if they were reading his column. Instead, he focused on the why. Why did the actor make this choice? Why was the scene set this way? What is the playwright trying to say? In 1966, we meet Walter Francis Kerr. He stepped into the chief position. Unlike Atkinson, he loved wordplay and flash. He was the first critic to include production photos in his articles, which added new depth and got audiences really excited for the productions. Often, he would give an opinion by asking rhetorical questions of his readers. And for his writing, he won a Pulitzer Prize for criticism in 1978. I feel like there's a really good mother-in-law joke there somewhere, but mine's super awesome, so I can't slide that in. He was known for panning shows he called musically ambitious. In other words, he loved giving Stephen Sondheim a really hard time. In 1980, we meet the butcher of Broadway himself, Frank Rich. He was considered the last of the make-or-break critics. Rich was blunt and fearless. He loved to comment on Andrew Lloyd Webber. Webber was famously quoted for saying that Rich was a man who knew nothing of love. I love Andrew Lloyd Webber. He's so sassy and dramatic. Spirit animal. People under his fire would often act out, like producer David Merrick, who once attempted to place an ad in the New York Times inviting arsonists to torch his office. Actors have tried to punch him, all kinds of things. I think one of my favorite things about Rich is that of all the shows he panned and of all the shows he tore apart, the one show that he loved was Cats. Yeah, he freaking loved it. Then we come to Ben Brantley. Oh, Ben Brantley. Ben is our current senior theater critic at the New York Times. He also has a fabulous nickname, the Celebrity Underminer. His writing style is closer to a review in that his articles give away plot points and commentary on the casting, hence the nickname. He tends to dismiss casts with celebrity. His feeling is that it's not only difficult for many Hollywood actors to make the change to stage, like Julia Roberts, James Franco, but he also feels that it's a poor marketing ploy. Despite the quality of the show, people will always pay to see celebrity in the flesh, therefore doing a disservice to the art form. I may not be a big Ben Brantley fan, but I definitely agree with that point. Now, what's interesting to me is this concept that internet has kind of killed the traditional art critic. Today, the formal role of the critic has been watered down with the development of the web. Some would argue this has also made an impact on a critic's ability to make or break a show, especially once it has a start date on Broadway. The New York Times still holds a level of esteem in the theater field, but the feeling of personal attacks have dissipated. When senior drama critics were widely respected, it was easy to perceive dislike as aggression, like Rich and Weber. But now that it only takes an opinion and a URL to have an internet presence, critiques and reviews have shifted to be about supporting the public visibility of art. I'm not necessarily saying that that's a bad thing, but, it is what it is. So I want to give you some examples of kind of how, what shows have actually been affected by critics and which haven't. So here are some that have been shut down by critics. One show that I personally refuse to acknowledge that it exists because I think it's so terrible is Love Never Dies. Andrew Lloyd Webber's, it's really the sequel to Phantom of the Opera. A lot of people haven't heard of it, and it's okay. But Ben Brantley said, "It's probably not a good idea to have your hero in his first solo sing 'The moments creep, but I can't bear to sleep' to a melody that moves like a sloth in quicksand." What he was trying to say is the show moves about that pace, and you shouldn't open the show with a solo that tells you how boring it's going to be. Love Never Dies did not do well, which is one of the reasons that most people haven't heard of it. The soundtrack has some great moments, the original cast recording has some great moments because it's Andrew Lloyd Webber. But if you're a huge Phantom fan like I am, it comes nowhere close. Another one that was shut down by critics was Carrie the musical, and that is actually one of my favorite cult classics. But Frank Rich said, "Those who have the time and money to waste on only one Anglo-American musical wreck on Broadway this year might as well choose Carrie. Were the rest of the evening as consistent in its uninhibited tastelessness, Carrie would be a camp masterpiece." Oh, damn! Did he go there? Oh! Yeah, anyway. Sorry, I got really excited. So again, Carrie had a very limited run, and it was completely panned by critics. Another one is The Wild Party. The Wild Party came in the tradition of cabaret, but received a lot of negative criticism from across the board. So Ben Brantley really summed up most of the critiques with this comment. "Suffering can make the exciting drama, of course, as long as you care about the sufferers. For the most part, the characters in the show are no deeper than their ashen makeup." Yes. I mean, I just love when somebody goes hard on a show like this. Wild Party is not one of my favorites, but did they deserve that comment? I don't know. Let's see. But some shows that have come out pretty well after being completely panned may really surprise you. Tony Award-winning Spring Awakening was loved by critics, but in comparison to other Tony legends, had a totally subdued response from audiences and a limited run on Broadway. In contrast, Avenue Q was hated by all but one critic during its previews on Broadway. It not only went on to win a Tony, the most surprising though, Wicked. Seriously, critics hated it. Ben Brantley wrote in 2003, "Wicked does not, alas, speak hopefully for the future of the Broadway musical." Oh man, that guy's so harsh. I don't understand it. It's such an interesting concept to me how you can walk into a show with that much oomph, I guess, and leave feeling like disappointed in musical theater. But I suppose I'm not a theater critic. I guess I'm more of a reviewer myself. Anyways, the point of sharing this super long-winded analysis of the critic versus the review and, critics that have actually had a voice in shutting down shows, is really to prep us for It's Only a Play. So Terrance McNally is the playwright of It's Only a Play, which is the point of this whole shebang. And I really wanted to give you guys kind of a background on what happens as you're on your way to Broadway and where the critic has the most voice. So I want to introduce you to our playwright for the evening. So the writer of It's Only a Play, his name is Terrance McNally. And McNally graduated from Columbia in 1961. And like most graduates with a BA in English, it was tough to break into any workforce. Luckily,